Hi everyone, my name is Jeff Starr, and in this video I'm going to be replacing the preamp tube in a Fender Super Champ. I'm using a preamp tube that was sent to me by a viewer and friend, hey Ryan, and this was ordered from Tube Depot. Don't drop it. This tube was ordered from Tube Depot. There's a little sticker there. Inside the paper, keeping it nice and safe. I shouldn't talk while crinkling. Little tiny tube here. This is a new old stock. This is, where is it? It's a 12 AT7. And I'll show you what it looks like. I'll keep it safe here. And this looks to be a Philips branded tube. I say that because it says the word Philips, ECG on it. So I think that's fairly safe to say it's a Philips tube. Now, on the Fender Super Champ, why would replacing the tube on this be sort of an interesting experiment? Well, there's a couple things you may or may not know. Now, this amp, as you hear when I turn this switch, has 15 or 16, what is it? It's 16 preset voices. Now, this is the XD model. There's the Super Champ X2, and in the X2 you can customize what those voices are via USB input. But I have the earlier version that doesn't have the USB, but doesn't matter. It's still the same concept. So these presets, where are they? There they are. This is like digital DSP modeling, and it'll essentially change the voice of your amp and its gain structure to make your amp sound like more blackface Fender, more tweed, give eventually some more modern sounding amps, high gain. There's some, sort of Marshall-y tones in there. If you are on the channel 1, this little channel switch here, it sounds as if you're not using that DSP. Well, having done more research on this amp, that digital modeling is always on. Just that when you are in channel 1, it is its most transparent setting, let's put it that way. So the signal path, as you go into the amp, it goes through the DSP modeling to voice your sound and give it some sort of additional gain structures to emulate the amp that it's trying to do, and help with the speaker modeling because it's only a 10-inch speaker in this. Then that goes into the preamp tube. And the preamp tube then provides additional gain and buffer and gives you more of that tube-like response because you're sort of using the DSP almost like you would like a solid-state pedal or some sort of digital modeling overdrive pedal. It's still running into a tube. The interesting thing, though, is that single preamp tube is doing dual purpose. It's a split tube. So it's doing both that preamp and buffer, but it's also acting as a phase inverter. Then it runs into the power tubes. And then, of course, out the speaker. So if you're running this at a low volume, the power tubes are active, but they're not like acting like tubes. They're not having sag and sort of that power tube response. You turn it up all the way, which is how I really think this amp sort of excels in its higher volumes. And then the digital modeling is acting sort of like a pedal into the amp. I think for the price of this, you've got yourself a really great tube amp, even though it's hybrid. So that's a brief explanation as to how this amp works and sort of its setup and why this question of would replacing the preamp tube, this guy, will this make much of a difference or not? I think it will, but there's only one way to find out. So let's find out. Okay, so just first quick note is you may have noticed that my outfit has changed, and that's because I'm going to be filming this video over a couple of days, broken up. A couple of reasons for that. One, my schedule's sort of busy. I can't get this all done in one big, long sort of session. And two, I think there's a benefit to that. Maybe that keeps my ears a bit more objective. For the recording here, I'm going to be playing a couple things. I'm going to play the guitar just by itself, but I also am going to record a loop onto this Boss RC2 looper. I will then use that loop with both preamp tubes so that we can hear the same pick attack. Basically, it's the same recording, all the same oomph into that tube. And I'll be making sure that the output levels on that pedal are consistent In terms of the amp itself, I will be on channel 1. I'll have the volume on 5 because I don't want the output tubes to get too hot and too sort of running their own sort of tubiness. Channel 2 obviously will skip, and then for treble and bass, that will be set on 5 so as to just sort of be a middle ground. It goes up to it goes to 10, so 5 feels like a nice middle space. And reverbs and effects, that's all off. I'll be playing this Fender Strat, so Fender into a Fender. I will also just play the amp with direct cable right into the amp, same amp settings, and so I can sort of feel what the differences the tube provides. I'm guessing maybe I will perhaps feel more of a reaction from the tube, either additional touch sensitivity or less, or more of a sagginess, squishiness to the way it feels when I play the amp. And that is something that I always find a little bit interesting and hard to sort of communicate via just the recording. For the recording, you'll see that I'll be using this SM57, and it will be basically there. And it'll be, of course, in the same spot for both times. I've taped that so that I have a reference, and I'll try to keep this as controlled as possible. Okay, so if you want to do a tube swap on the Fender Super Champ, it's very easy to access this. Obviously, disconnect from power. I'm going to disconnect the speaker. And there are 4 screws here that you need to undo. So I'm just going to use a drill here. And very quickly, very easily, line it up. 1, 2. Nope, drop that one. Oh, hopefully won't step on that. There. And now, the cage here that protects the tubes is actually attached to that panel. And so it can come right off in one piece. Ta-da. And now you have access to the inside of your amp. I have a little flashlight here. You can see here's our 2 power tubes. These are Fender GT groove tubes. And then in here is our preamp tube. And we're going to be replacing this with this Philips new old stock tube. So this should be just as simple now as wiggling this free. I'm going to have to turn off the flashlight just so I can get a little better leverage here. And this should just come right out. I'm trying to be gentle. There we go. Great. And this is just a Fender. You can see Fender 12 AX7. All right, and let's get our new tube. You just need to line up the pins with the underside here. So just going to get the pins lined up and push and give it a little wiggle. It starts to slide in, up. Come on. Great. That is in. So there you go. Last final note, I've attached the back plate. Of course, always make sure that you plug your speaker in. If you don't plug your speaker in, you're going to blow things up. Testing amp dynamics. Same loop, different tubes. So, what are my thoughts? Well, this is this has been really interesting, and probably one of the more exciting videos I've made. Very much made my day and has made my week. It's something I probably would not have tried out otherwise, and that's just awesome. In terms of how it sounds, this is a really tough thing. In the room, I think that the original stock tube sounded a bit more dynamic and less compressed, but also higher highs, maybe a bit more sharp and piercing. And I don't know if that's because like transients were spiking, or if it was something else. The Phillips tube, which was in this box, was an AT7, and of course the Fender that it shipped with was an AX7. And that's sort of its own interesting thing, like, you know, how are those tubes, which are sort of interchangeable, how do they sound different, or do they at all? I would say, like, the main thing I noticed was dynamics, especially when playing through the loop. I tried really hard to make sure that all the volume on the loop pedal and on the amp was exactly the same. I'm just checking all that one last time, and it's just sounded quieter on the AT7. But it may also just be quieter because the attacks and the transients in those highs were a little more tamed and not as brittle. That was one thing when I was playing with the Fender tube, the AX7, is that although it sounded louder and it was also more presence in the room, I did leave feeling like, oh, that's just my one ear is just a little spiked, little ice picked. I do not feel that to the same degree with the AT7. The main thing I'm really curious about, though, is to listen to the recording, so which I've not done, and I will be hearing it sort of the same way you are for the first time, essentially. When you watch the video, that's where I'm going to see it when I watch the video, too. Of course, I'll be editing it, but what I would really like from you, a viewer, is to leave comments and tell me, what do you hear differently? What do you sort of notice or not? How different do they sound to you? Now, going forward, the next question I would have for you as a viewer is, do you want to hear a tube swap on this? So this is the orange Micro Terror. And if you're not familiar with this amp, it's 20 watts. It has a solid state power section, but it uses a 12 AX7 preamp tube in a traditional gain stage, just straight up gain stage, not like the Super Champ where it's sort of a split usage. And because it's a solid state on the power amp, it would be sort of interesting to hear, like, what does changing that preamp tube, how does that actually affect this? Because it should be a little more, hopefully that's in the camera, should be a little bit more apparent. So let me know about that. Let me know what you hear in the Super Champ. If you like this video, please feel free to check out other stuff on my channel. You can, of course, subscribe, click the bell to get notified whenever I post new content. And if you really loved this video or you like the other stuff that I'm doing, please feel free to visit me on Patreon. And a huge, tremendous thank you to everyone who is over there. People are just blowing my mind every time they join over there, and I want to really be very, very clear with how grateful I am about that. That is it for now. This was my preamp tube swap in the Fender Super Champ. Thank you so much for watching. Happy practicing. All right, bye.